and welcome to another episode of Mental Odyssey. I am Sarah, and today is a solo podcast. Woo! I wanted to come on here today and talk about our ever-evolving relationship with our parents. I think that in our society, we tend to think that our relationship with our parents ends after 18 years, or that the relationship that we have growing up with them is the same one that we will have in our adulthood. And in my almost 26 years of experience, that is not necessarily the case. So I was thinking I'll start at the beginning. So I was born into a family of 3. And then I gained a little brother along the way. So we became a family of 5. In the house that I grew up, my dad would go to work and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she also had a couple of side projects. She did some real estate work for my grandparents, and she did like Mary Kay and Cookie Lee and some of those like entrepreneurial routes. And I can remember in that portion of my childhood that me and my dad were very close, and I gained a lot of respect for my dad through those times because he was the one that I would go to when I was having a bad day or when I had a bad dream and I needed some comfort. He was like the one. When I was like sick, I'd go to him. The little meme, the I threw up. That was my dad who would be on the receiving end of that. And yeah, it was a really nice experience growing up with my dad. My relationship with my mom has been a little bit rocky. In the beginning, I was very much parentified by her. I think that she was a bit overwhelmed with having the 3 kids that she had, and she needed my help, and I was more than willing to give it, but that also left a lot of room for disappointment because I was not allowed to be a kid. I was like her little helper, and I got a lot of pride out of that as a child, and now looking at it as an adult, it's like that probably shouldn't have been what was happening. I can remember that I felt like she was very reactive while we were growing up. I was always worried that she was going to be upset about something, and it was hard. It was hard to want to please somebody so much, but also not knowing where she was going to be at that moment. My parents ended up getting divorced when I was in 3rd grade. We had just recently moved to a different house, and maybe it was 4th grade. Yeah, it was 4th grade. Anyway, we moved to a new house in 2nd grade, and my dad only lived there with us for about 2 years. And then when they got divorced, my dad moved out, and the parentification just like went through the roof. My mom, I think, was in a state of like maybe giving up, maybe self-discovery. I know that she felt a lot of loss in that time. Growing up Mormon, divorce is very much frowned upon. And so there's not a lot of room for holding space for divorcees in our community and also in our family. There was a lot of disconnect because of my parents' divorce. So she was isolated from the world, and so were we. And I was in charge of taking care of my younger brother. My older brother ended up moving in with my dad. And So I was in charge of like waking him up, waking up my mom, getting tea ready for school, getting me ready for school, walking us to school, getting us home from school. And it was a really hard time at that time. My mom ended up getting married at the end of my 6th grade year, going into 7th grade, and she was moving up to Idaho, and I wanted to stay close to my friends and my family. And so I ended up moving in with my dad and my stepmom, and it was a difficult transition. Since it had been a few years since I'd lived with my dad, I'd only seen him on the weekends, and he was like Disneyland parent on the weekends. He was like the dad that I had remembered from my childhood. And then when we moved in, it slowly changed from me being a daddy's girl to my dad being a husband to his wife. And the attention that I got when I was younger was not the same. I felt very disconnected from that house and from my dad, and I felt replaced by my stepmom. Pretty soon after I moved in with them, my stepmom got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and that took up a lot of space because she needed a lot from my dad for not only comfort, but just like taking care of her and helping ease some of the pain that she was going through. And so we would get interrupted pretty often by her to come and have my dad help her out with, a foot massage or drawing a bath or whatever it was. And I built up a lot of resentment in that time because I very much needed that father figure in my life, and I didn't have the space or the words or even the voice to be able to talk about my upset in that time. I also didn't have like the processing power to be able to be like, okay, the reason that I was so close to my dad while I was growing up was because my mom didn't give him the love that a partner should. And so he channeled all of that love into us as kids. And then once my stepmom came into the picture, it was like some of that love was sucked up by her in a good way. I mean, it's good to have a healthy relationship with your partner, with your spouse. But as a kid going through that transition, how I only knew of like my dad, the one that's like always taking care of me, the one that's like I can depend on, and having that switch to my dad, the husband, was really, really hard on me. I can remember pulling him to the side and communicating how upset I was about the lack of attention that I was getting while I was at his house. And there were a couple times that my stepmom eavesdropped, and it did not end well. And that just further made me feel like even when I did find my voice, it wasn't worth anything because nothing was going to change. At the end of the day, my dad was a husband and not a father anymore. And I felt that. Like I felt displaced, replaced, unimportant, sometimes like a burden. And that was a really hard thing for me to adjust to with the childhood that I had, and like going from living at my mom's house where there was no structure except for what I put into place. And I was expecting when I went back to my dad's house that there would be love and support and structure. And we definitely had structure. And I would say that there was support for our school activities. But outside of that, like, I felt like the emotional connection that I had was fractured at that point. Like, I didn't have the dad that I grew up with anymore. And as a 16-year-old, that was really hard for me. Pretty soon after moving into my dad's house, this is when I was about 13. I stopped going to church. I stopped being a Mormon. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore because I felt God had failed me. I was promised a family that would stay together forever, and that was not the circumstances that I ended up having. And that was a really hard thing to grapple with. And then I got closer with people who were not Mormon, and some of them were gay or bi, and the doctrine that I grew up on is like, stay away from those kinds of people. But I saw how genuine these people were versus the people that I was going to church with who would say one thing on Sunday and do a completely different thing on Monday. So I displaced myself from the religion that I grew up in, which was a hard transition. I think I felt like I was disappointing my parents by doing that, which was just another barrier that got put between us, because I know that they wanted me to be a person of faith, and very specifically that faith, and that just is not how it happened. And so pile all of that together, and I just didn't feel close to my parents, to my family. My relationship with my mom actually got better after she moved away, because she ended up being the Disneyland parent, where we only see her, in the summers or when she had something that she was coming down into town for. And so a lot of our relationship happened over the phone, where she was able to, designate time to be there for me. Before I ended up leaving the church, I actually went to my bishop and I was like, hey, I really need some counseling. I need therapy, because being a child of divorce and being a parentified child, I was dealing with emotions that were way bigger than what I should have been dealing with at the time. And I wanted desperately for an adult to be there to help and support me through the emotions that I was having. And I knew that therapy exists. I knew that counselors were a thing. And my dad suggested that we try and get it through the church so that they could pay for it. And in that meeting with my bishop, he basically just told me that, like, let's try hanging out with friends who are in the church, and then we'll follow up afterwards. And the follow-up never happened, and the therapy didn't happen until I was way moved out and on my own, making my own decisions. And so that was really, it was hard going through that time, knowing I needed the help and not being able to put words to any of my feelings. During the time that I was living at my dad's, I was with friends who self-harmed, and I ended up picking that up as like the thing to do to deal with the hard feelings. And on top of that, my older brother was vaping, like having nicotine, and he brought that into the family for us. And so I was vaping and, suicidal and self-harming through my childhood in that house, which just furthered the disconnection between me and my parents, because it felt like I was living a completely different life, like alongside them in their same house that they had no idea about. Like, one of my self-harm endeavors. I ended up piercing my lip, and I had to have my brother come and help me put like a piercing in it. And my parents never noticed that I had my lip pierced until I decided to just not care about having it pierced. And it made me feel invisible in the house that I was growing up in. Like, all of my struggles, my parents, who should be the closest to me, who should be watching out for me, completely did not see me in that time. And that was difficult. When I was getting close to graduation, I was 17, and I wanted nothing more than to be out of the house that I was being raised in, because it just felt so, I want to say degrading, but that's not the right word. It felt suffocating in that house. It felt like I was being stifled. It felt like I was unloved. I was told that I was loved a lot, but I only got glimpses of the actions of love. Obviously, they made sure that our basic needs were met, that our schooling wasn't suffering. But outside of that, like, feelings were not talked about in that house. And when they were not validated. And there were actually like pretty severe repercussions emotionally for putting my emotions out there. Like I said, with my stepmom eavesdropping, there was a time where shit just hit the fan afterwards. And she's like, well, if you don't want me around, then I guess I'll just leave. And that was a really hard night, trying to get her to stay, because I know that my dad was happy with her. I wish that our communication, like retrospectively, I wish that our communication could have been better in that time, because there's a lot that I had to rewrite and unwrite due to that time. So, but anyway, I was turning 17, and I had my senior year ahead of me, and I decided that I wanted to graduate early so that I could move out of my parents' house quicker. And so I was in the process of that, and as I was in the process of that, I met my ex-fiance, and I graduated early, and within a week of graduating, which was about a month of talking, not even being official, but just like talking, I ended up moving into his house. He had 2 kids and an apartment, and to me, that was like the perfect out. It was the perfect place that I could go to just not be in the house that was suffocating me, not being under my parents' control, quote unquote. I didn't really feel controlled, but that was a ride. Being a 17-year-old moving out on your own, or not on your own, but away from home. It was very difficult. So while I was living with my ex, like I said, he ended up proposing, and we ended up playing family together with him and his kids, and I ended up buying a house with my mom because we both wanted to get out of our apartments. She had gotten divorced and moved down to our city, and she was living in an apartment, and so was I. We wanted to get rid of them. And so we bought a house together. All of us moved in, and while I was in that house, I ended up starting therapy. And at that point, I had added on not only mommy issues, daddy issues, but also codependency and the parentification that I had in the past. But my mom was living with my younger brother, and so he moved into the house too. And so I was like parentified all over again and reliving this narrative that I was living in my childhood in the house that I lived in with my mom. And I realized that she was not taking care of my son, which was my younger brother, not really my son, but might as well have been from the experience that we had together. And he was not respectful at the time. It was very hard to live in that house. They didn't get along with my ex. My ex didn't get along with them. There's a lot of animosity in the house. I felt very separated from my mom because she was gone a lot. She had a lot of other things going on, and it was very triggering for me of my childhood growing up with her in her house when she was out dating other people and just gone a lot. And that's the experience that I had in the house that we bought together. And that was not fun, to be a 12-year-old in an 18-year-old's body, just reliving my childhood all the time. And so, like I said, I went to therapy. I started therapy, and it took me about 1.5 years to finally get out of my relationship with my ex, which was pretty emotionally abusive at the very least. He would stonewall me, gaslight me, make me feel less than. And I gave him that power. I can't say that, like, it's all on him. I was very happy playing the codependent role because I was just looking for love from a man, you know. So once I ended up breaking up with him, I was still living in the house with my mom. She was still gone all the time. I was still being triggered and flipping back and forth between being an adult and being a child. And I decided that I wanted to get out of it. My mom actually came to me and was like, hey, to help me get my ducks in a row, I'm going to go ahead and put the house solely in my name. And I'm like, that's messed up because this is our house, not your house. And for you to just change everything to where it's just your house, like, I don't like that. And so I ended up trying to get the house by myself, but I didn't make enough money at the time to take over the mortgage. And so I started looking at options to sell my name off of the mortgage to my mom. So that's what I ended up doing. At this point, I had 2 dogs, one from my previous relationship and one that dog had birthed. So I kept the dog and her puppy. And so I had 2 huskies. And I first was looking for an apartment that I was going to split with my best friend and my brother and one of his friends. And turns out it's really hard to get an apartment with a husky if they're not like a registered service animal. And so I spent time wishing to myself, I wish that I had a studio apartment where I could just be with me and my dogs. And so I got an RV, and that's exactly what I got. I got a studio apartment on wheels where I could leave the place that hurt me, the city, the town, the state that had so many raw memories for me. And I got to just explore for a bit. And when I left, me and my mom were not on speaking terms. I told her that I didn't want to talk to her for a while because I needed to heal. I needed separation from her to be able to get my thoughts right and just heal from everything, because I don't know if she knew that we didn't have a good relationship because we just didn't really talk about it. But I very much was harboring hard feelings about a lot of things in that period of time. And so I decided I wasn't going to talk to her. I can't remember if I actually communicated that to her or not, but she knew, and I knew that it was really hard for her. Like, retrospectively, I feel really bad for doing it that way, but that's exactly what I needed in that time, was to just have that separation, to just be myself, to be me without my mom, without my parents, like trying to figure out who I was. So at 21, I took my RV. I traveled around a bit to like California and whatnot, and I would just come in to visit home every once in a while. And it was hard being home. It was really hard being home because I would stay at my mom's house where I just had so much past experience, so much trauma that was stored in that house. Like, I couldn't walk in that house without everything being flooded back. I couldn't drive through the town that I grew up in without having flashbacks of memories that I had with friends that I didn't have anymore, and with relationships that I didn't have anymore, like partnerships that I didn't have. And so it was really draining. Like, I would have a hangover, an emotional hangover every time that I visited home, but it felt like I had to keep coming back just to like touch in and visit people. So I ended up getting a couple of jobs. My ex-girlfriend ended up coming to live with me, and we did a couple of jobs together, and then we ended up separating, and I ended up in this little town in Washington where I met my husband, and finally having a relationship where I felt held and safe and protected by a male figure, which is my husband. I had the space to explore my childhood relationship with my parents and what I could do differently if I had the chance, and what I would like to talk about if I had the chance. And my parents ended up coming out here, my dad and my stepmom, and I made a PowerPoint presentation of my childhood trauma that I could go over with them just to like clear the air, because I felt like they didn't know who I was as a person, because we lived in the same house for a long time, but we were so separate. We were doing our own things. They both worked until like 5 p.m. So they'd come home and do homework and then go to bed. And that was about the extent of the relationship. We'd do family chores together on Saturday, but then everybody would go their separate ways. And I don't know if my parents thought too much about it, because it was like, oh yeah, this is what teenagers do. They just, they don't want to be home as much. And so I don't know if it was that deep. So I wanted to break it down for them and have them be able to see me for what I felt like was the first time. And I wanted to let go of the resentment that I had with my stepmom, because as a kid, it was like, this is the woman who made it so that my dad doesn't love me anymore. But as an adult, it was like, oh, my dad just needed love, and she gave it to him. And so I was able to kind of look at it from a different perspective, which really helped me open up to myself and be honest with myself of what I needed. And then in turn, let me open up to my parents to let them know what I needed. And it was really nice to sit down and present that PowerPoint to them and have them be able to see me. And our relationship since then has been really good. I've been able to take away the block that I've had with my stepmom for all of those years and actually depend on her and accept the love that she has always held for me. And she actually came through for me with the wedding, which would not have been possible if I didn't make that PowerPoint and sit them down and have that conversation and like rewrite my childhood narrative of them. Also, along the way, I encouraged my mom to start going to therapy. Her and her husband were having quite a few problems, and I wanted her to be available to me. I wanted her mind to be available to me. And I wanted her to heal some of her past trauma so that she could be available to be the mother that I wanted her to be. The mother that she was capable of being, I guess. It's very healing to be able to change your relationship that you had with your parents. The one that you had growing up doesn't have to be the one that you had in your adulthood. Like, we go through phases of evolution in our lives. You can rewrite the narratives that you had from your childhood, and you don't have to hold those into adulthood. And, you know, with the perspective of being an adult, my mom was my age when she had my brother, which is crazy for me to think, because it's like, I'm not ready to have a kid right now. Like, I have that outside perspective of, oh, she might have actually been doing her best, which I did not believe in my childhood. I did not believe that she was doing her best. But now I can look back and be like, you know, if I were in that situation, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know what kind of parent I would have been. Like, being a single mom and also losing your family connections in the same breath, and then having the ability to date for the first time in your whole life as, you know, a 40-year-old or whatever it was, like, it's a big change. It's a big shift in somebody's life. And as a kid, we're selfish, like, as we should be. Like, self-centeredness is a part of growing up. You know, you're worried about your own thoughts and your own ideas and your own relationships. But as you become an adult, you start thinking about other people and how other people might be experiencing the world and what their perspectives might be. And I'm very glad that I took the time to change my perspective about my parents and open up to them and allow them to hold the space for me to be exactly who I am, to be exactly who I was meant to be, and to just have a better relationship with them going forward. My wedding was a very important time for me, not just because of obviously taking the next step in my life, but I got to have my parents there, and I had a nice relationship with them at the time. I still do, but, you know, going from the childhood that I had, if you would have told me, hey, one day you're going to feel supported and loved and held and important and seen by your parents, then I wouldn't have believed it. I would not have believed you if you told me that, because of how distant we were growing up. But it's not too late. You know, it's not too late to be the vulnerable one in your family. It's not too late to be the one to start the hard conversation. And you never know the effect that it'll have on all of your family. You know, you don't know how it'll impact other people. I think when you're stuck in the child mindset, you're like, oh, I don't want them to be upset. I don't want to be shut down. But when you can hold that space for yourself and be like, this is the most important thing for me to do for me, and whatever happens out of it, I'm okay with, because it's better than holding on to this narrative that I've had that's not working. It's a nice transition. It feels good. And I know that not everybody has the ability to do that. Not every parent is going to be open to it. But I think it's worth a shot. You know, it's worth a shot, just opening up and being vulnerable with yourself and with your parents to have the chance at rewriting some of that and having a new relationship with them. So if you've been thinking about talking to your parents, or if you've been upset about your childhood for a long time, then this is your sign to go and explore yourself, explore your own mind, and see if you can make a better relationship with your parents going forward. It's not over until they're gone, and so it's worth a shot. At least in my case it was. I'm very glad that I ended up doing that, and having that relationship, being able to shift it. I'm very glad today to have done the work in therapy to understand myself, to hold space for other people's truths, and to be able to step into my superpower, which is my vulnerability, and to be able to help other people in the process. So yeah, I encourage you to go have a conversation with your parents, and I hope for your sake that some healing comes out of it, because we all could use that. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope that you found something out of it that you can take with you. Let me know in the comments if you're going to do this and how it goes. So thank you for being here today, and we will see you next time. Mental Odyssey is a Dream and Do podcast, produced and edited by yours truly. The music is owned by Chill Hop, and this song is Velocities by Sleepy Fish. Go check them out. Thanks for being here.